Hello everyone and a warm welcome to Online Events and our session Coronavirus, Considering Our Responses and Our Responsibilities. So we're here live right now with Kate Dunn and Carole Francis Smith. So a warm welcome back to Online Events. We really appreciate you both being here in such extraordinary times. So thank you very much for that. I think we were going to start, Carole, you were going to say just a little bit about our context and acknowledging where we are right now, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. John, were you going to say something about how the setup of, was there anything housekeeping or anything about the setup you were going to?
Ah, yes, of course. Sorry, Carole, I'm going straight
worries.
into the bit. I think I'm so keen to hear your context. Yeah. I'm missing out. Absolutely. Sorry about
don't pick me up then.
Yes. Well, I guess as we were saying a moment ago, and this is also applies to the colleagues who are watching the replay, there is a recording, so you will be able to watch this. If you miss anything, please go to the recording. You can play it as many times as you want. We're going to make that freely available for the colleagues. We've got a set of questions in terms of feedback from the community that we're going to try and address in this hour, and that's what we're going to be focused on. We are going to try and take some questions from the colleagues that are here with us live, but we think we've whittled down the questions to most of what everybody's worrying about. But please put your questions in, so if we miss anything, we can come back to that. Carole is going to set the context for where we are. Kate, you're going to do a breathing exercise with us to get us into the hour. And then we've got three things that we really want to make sure that you know and can do. So we want to give you some really specific things to take away and use for your practice. And then we're going to get into some questions that are more reflective, and I guess that we need to think over maybe with our supervisors. And yeah. Okay, Carole, over to you, I think.
Okay. So really, first of all, we want to acknowledge how difficult times are for us all at the moment, and that we're struggling to find our way in this really fast moving environment that we find ourselves in, and we're being affected as human beings and as professional therapists in all ways. So we've come together at this event to consider our responsibilities and our options, and in really protecting the vulnerable, and that includes our families, ourselves and our clients. So all round, this is where we find ourselves. And the dilemmas that we're faced with are sort of relevant in the context that we work in, and we appreciate that we've had people from all across, not just this the country, other countries as well. And I really thank you for coming together. We really appreciate it. And so some of these contexts are maybe we work from home, and we can no longer sort of do that through somebody vulnerable being in our household, or ourselves. We might be vulnerable, and we're thinking about our clients as well. We might have clinic space that we may or may not be able to work in, depending on how that clinic runs. And in the NHS, in certain parts of the country now, we've stopped face-to-face counselling and are being asked to do something different. So, we find ourselves in different contexts, and with different practices that last week we knew where we were, and this week we're not really sure of our responsibilities. And some of us all our practices are different to each other as well. We might have mixed practices and a range of different clients. So today we want to grapple with some of the current questions that are around together. But before we do any of that, it'll be really great if we could take a collective breath. And we're going to pass over to Kate. She's going to walk us through that.
Thank you, Carole. And this is just something that so many of you will be familiar with. And if you're not, I really urge you just to take a moment to join in with us, because we come to this from frantic days, we come from all kinds of stresses and strains. It's 6:30 in the evening. Many of us usually won't be engaging in this kind of thing at this kind of day. So I just want to invite you to join in with me in just a short breathing space. So wherever you are, if you could just bring yourself into the present moment, thinking about your posture, perhaps adopting an erect and dignified posture, perhaps closing your eyes, and just asking yourself, what is my experience right now? Where are my thoughts? Where are my feelings? How is my body? Acknowledging and registering that experience. It may even be unwanted. Maybe putting in your head the experience into words. Perhaps you're thinking some self-critical thoughts. Perhaps you're feeling some tension in your neck and shoulders. Just noticing. And then just moving on to redirecting that attention to your breath, to your in-breath and your out-breath. Each breath without changing it as it follows one after the other. Just breathing in, breathing out. Using the breath as an anchor to bring you here into this place, into this shared space together, helping you tune into a state of awareness and a state of stillness. And now just expanding out into your field of awareness around that breath, including a sense of your body as a whole, your posture, your face, the sense around you. Take the breath to wherever you may feel tense or feel discomfort or resistance. Just breathe into those sensations. And while breathing out, allowing a sense of letting go, of softening, saying it's okay to feel what I'm feeling, whatever it is. And let's just open up to the place we're in, to the shared space we have together, and really make the most of this time that we have. Just opening our eyes and returning to our event, and over to you, John.
Thank you both. Thank you, Carole, for setting the context that we're in, and thank you, Kate, for helping us regulate, I guess, and just settle. Thank you. Yeah. Well, we felt like with so much that we are anxious about, it'd be great if we could give everybody 3 things to do that we think are really, really important. So much of what we need to do as therapists is around the reflection, and we live in the grey. And sometimes when we're anxious, it's just really helpful to get some absolutely definite things to do. So we've had a lot of feedback about if we're going to move online and work with our clients, what platform should we use? And so we've had a lot of conversation about this. And the 3 of us all use Zoom, the platform that we're on right now. So we would recommend that if you're going to work online, make that your first port of call. Go to the Zoom website and register for a Zoom account and use that platform with your clients. Now, there are other platforms, and if you're using other platforms, we're not telling you to do something different or this is the only platform to use, but that's a kind of good place to start. And you can see here we've got over 1,600 colleagues together. The platform is rock solid. It's a great place to see your clients one-to-one.
John, can I just add, and there is all you will need is the free version. If you're just doing one-to-one, you won't need any paid version. The free version works perfectly well.
That's great. Thank you for just catching that for us, Kate. So you can make that. It's not going to cost colleagues any more to be online with their clients. Yeah. Number 2, we felt like a really important thing to be doing is if you're moving your practice online, is to check in with your insurance company. Whether that's pop them a message through the website or give them a call and make sure the insurance that you're using either in private practice or as an organization will cover the contact, the online contact that you're engaging with. And the 3rd thing we want you to think about is if you're going to get into a video session, a bit like we're in just now, have a think about your environment. organize your environment and get it ready so that it's appropriate for your clients. So if you've got your pen, which you might have, or you might want to rewind it if it's a replay, these are the top 3 things. Go and get the free version of Zoom, number 1. Number 2, check in with your insurance provider. And number 3, have a think about an organized environment if you're going to use a video session. And this, of course, Kate and Carole, is something that we have talked a lot about, isn't it? And we're all using 3 different environments. So maybe that's the place where we can start the discussion. Like, how have you chosen your different environments, or what might you want to say about your environment?
Yeah, well, I'll start if you like, John, although yours is the most interesting environment, I would say. So, you know, I don't work from home for my face-to-face work. So I don't have an office or somewhere that I feel happy about sort of having as a background around me. And there's lots of different ways of thinking about, you know, what is appropriate or not appropriate and good enough for sort of therapy. So I have chosen to, you know, where I work doesn't feel quite good enough for me. So I work with a curtain behind me that I can sort of whip away, and you know, I don't need it there all the time. So this is a corner of a loft office that I am in, and you know, people do get very curious about what's behind the curtain sometimes, and I've had to make lots of decisions in terms of what colour it is, the fact that no light comes through it, and that sort of thing. So you know, so there is quite a practical reason, but I also appreciate that it brings up other sort of therapeutic ideas about you know, what you have behind you. So so you can create a space where you are if you don't have a space, I guess, like this, and I'll pass over.
I'm demonstrating the use of a room that I do see clients in. I work from home and I see clients from this room, which is perhaps a sort of luxury in a way, because it means that when I'm working online, I use exactly the same space and have my webcam set up, and can therefore, in my own mind, which I think is significant, get myself into my counselling kind of frame of myself very easily. That's something that you may all want to think a little bit about. When you create a space at home to meet with people, you may not feel very much like your counselling self. So it's worth taking a little bit of time to create a special space where you feel perhaps a little bit more like you do when you go into your usual counselling room. And there are all sorts of ways of doing this. And John's going to tell us a bit about his space, because this might kind of blow your mind, some of you.
Yeah, and I'm demonstrating another option that Zoom has offered, I think in just the last year or 2, where you can then create a virtual background. So because I travel a lot, because I used to travel a lot, I've not been traveling recently because things are changing, then I have uploaded a picture into Zoom, and then I can actually choose my background. So if I'm working in different locations, the people in my practice and when I'm working as a trainer always see a consistent background. So that's also an option, depending on the kind of computer that you have. You can upload a picture that's appropriate, and then that becomes your background. You need to get your lighting a bit right, but yeah, it can work really well, and it saves you tidying up behind you. So yes, although I do have quite a tidy background tonight, but it's a really great function with Zoom. I think that also got us into some other things that we'd be thinking about when we're starting to work online. And some of that is around the confidentiality that we hold both in the location that we're working from and in the location of the client. So I wonder if we could just say a couple of things about that, like what we might as therapists need to be thinking about if suddenly we find ourselves working at home and working with clients.
Can I just pause for a moment, John, and just say at this point, we are not sitting here assuming you are all going to take all your clients online, because I think we've gone into this, and I don't want anyone to get the impression that it's a given that you will take your clients into online work. And it's really important we say that at the outset. You have some choices to make. Online work is something the government keep recommending for all walks of life, and it is something that we can consider. But consider is an important word. We've got an ethical responsibility to work out for ourselves what's most appropriate. Is it most appropriate to try and take our practice online? Is it possible and is it feasible? And that will be different client by client, perhaps, because we will also want to think about the impact on our client. Or it may be more appropriate for us to use a telephone. Telephones are absolutely part of our technology that we could use, or it may be more appropriate to take a break. So I'm sorry to sort of throw that one in at this point, John, but I didn't want anybody listening to think that we were only talking about this being the option that you can take. Okay, sorry.
Thank you for catching that, Kate. Like, because I think we're wanting to put this hour on as a way of thinking, like, what would we need to think about if we're not then seeing our clients?
And the problem is that the work we've done with John has often in the past been about people taking their practice online. So of course this is the area of expertise that Carole and I have. But I don't want any assumptions that that's what we're saying you should do. We're just trying to help those people who have maybe never even thought about doing it before, who really actively didn't want to do it, but find themselves under pressure to work online, or having this as their only option to continue ethically working with their clients. Okay.
Well, I think it's interesting when we're thinking about technology and being online, we don't think about the telephone. It's like, and this is the process, isn't it? We no longer think about chairs as technology, it's just the chair. And so we're thinking about contact with clients, not necessarily video contact, it could be the telephone. And I think the other thing we wanted to frame in our conversation too is like not to assume that everybody is going to want, sorry, I'm conflating two things in my head at once and it's not working in terms of my verbal communication. Yes, and now my mind has blanked.
John, I think you were maybe thinking that it's a decision not only for the therapist, am I able to provide an environment to work online, but for each client, it's a decision for the client as well. And, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about how you explore that and how you set it up safely with your client. But please do remember that it's not something that you can just have a blanket statement about. These are individual decisions to make, both for yourself and for your clients, one by one.
I was going to say, you know, you already have relationships with your clients and an understanding of them, and you'll be making these decisions together about what's appropriate for, you know, carrying on during this period of time. So you already have perhaps what you need, but it is a bit anxiety provoking, perhaps being pushed into making decisions that we used to have time for.
Yes. And I think that's a really important...
the other bit that we wanted to frame, isn't it? Like, this is not about training to work with people we haven't met. Like, if we're in practice with clients, and then how we continue to work with those clients. And that's different from training as an online therapist to open an online practice. And I think this is the dilemma that lots of colleagues and services are presented with. And I guess one of the questions is around that is, how might we recontract with clients, and what might clients need to know and think about if we're going to phone them or we're going to be on Zoom with them. So could we go there next? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Of course.
Sure.
Of course. Yeah.
And I think...
oh, carry on.
I was just going to say, I think it is probably a good point as well to, if people who are watching haven't already found it, BACP are incredibly onto this in terms of providing all sorts of useful guidelines and support. And I mean, one of the reasons Carole's printer was hot off the press, just 2 minutes before we started, was because we discovered all sorts of extra new things that have been added today. So please do keep looking at that page on the BACP website. Sandra will give you a link if you haven't got it. And there are thoughts on there about contracting. John is talking about contracting, and what there you will find on there is some helpful hints as to what additional things you may want to consider, talk to your clients about, and if you agree that perhaps you want to go in this direction of using a telephone when you haven't used a phone before, therapeutically, or using the online space, the kinds of additional factors which will be to do with issues to do with confidentiality and how you ensure that, things to do with backup plans for what you will do should you lose your connection, which could happen either online or on a telephone. It's always important to have, what will we do if somebody suddenly disappears? It's not going to happen in a face-to-face session, is it? That, you know, someone's just going to suddenly not be there, and that can be really frightening. So it's very important to have backup plans. It's really important to make sure that you've thought about all kinds of issues around fee payment. If your client usually comes and hands you the money, you know, if there's a fee involved, you need to be thinking about how you're going to contract for that. Carole, what else have I've not kind of thought in my sudden thinking about the extra contracting?
Yeah, well, you know, interestingly, this week my clinic is still, where I work face-to-face, is still open for the minute. But, you know, as we know, one day to the next, things are changing so rapidly that I took the opportunity to sort of speak to all of them about, like, negotiating what we could manage and not manage and those sorts of things. And it was sort of, you know, sometimes people are in situations, they're coming to therapy because they're going to be confined with people that are, you know, part of the issue of why they're coming to therapy. You know, there's really a whole host of sort of things that are already in our field of what we know and what we've already thought about. So a certain type of communication might be better, and we might find
just the contract, Carole.
Yeah,
I think, you
oh
know,
right, okay,
the
bringing
question
me
being
back.
about contracting. I think
Sure.
it's not about throwing your existing contract away. It's not about abandoning that. It's about what additional things do you need to add. You may decide there are certain things you can put on a quick additional sheet of paper, or, you know, send online as an email attachment, as just some additional, which is something I've done. I've produced some extra points, and I've produced, you know, we have been meeting face to face. I am continuing to have final face to face sessions with some clients in order to do this contracting. And I am still doing that. You know, it feels to me important to have that final face-to-face meeting where we can talk about what we're going to do next. And I have a sheet of paper on which I've laid out additional things that could be important if we're going to move to a phone or to online. And as I say, on the BACP guidelines, there are some useful templates for that. So do go there, look for that.
And, you know, and that's been, you know, it's a different context. So there'll be issues that are potentially, and quite often our clients wouldn't have thought about. So, you know, they're important to talk through. And, you know, because I do work in this way, I'm lucky enough to be able to link people to a website to consider types of working together. But, you know, I have clients that telephone would be the only option because that will be what they could manage, and they may not decide to do that. So, you know, it's very client-led.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, so keeping the client at the center of that process, these are the things that they would need to think about and know from us too. And of course, as we're preparing our space, we want to make sure that we're also able to sit in a place that is confidential. Can we work in a place in our homes where nobody is overhearing what we're saying and how we might be responding to a client? So that also feels really important, that we're thinking about what's the context that the client can access, and what's the context that we can access also.
And that's a really important point in our contracting, John, because this is the difference. We can only suggest to our client how they might create that space. And it is one of our responsibilities, I think, to point out to them how important it is to be able to create a confidential space. And it may be that they tell us that isn't going to be feasible. In fact, yesterday I had this very thing with somebody who realized that they could have a telephone conversation from their car.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is in their drive.
Mm.
It would give them a confidential space. So we can all be creative about this. But the thing we can't do is create the space ourselves in the way that we can in a face-to-face encounter, because we have control over our room. We only have control over half of that. But we have a responsibility to talk with our clients about, and to help them to see the need for their own space to be secure and confidential, and to take responsibility for that. We need to be able to create we probably already have a relationship of trust. These are our existing clients. Yes. So they will trust us when we try and help them to create that, I think.
Well, trust us to be good enough, I think. Yeah. I think in a way we are all in the same boat, because we might be self-isolating with our families at home as well. So the appropriateness and the flexibility of will be very crucial to a sort of ever-changing environment.
Can I just make a point that a question I did see in the chat room, they're flashing by and I can't see them all, but was from somebody who said that the BACP guidelines say you can't work online unless you've had training. I think, again, if you turn to the advice for under these special circumstances on the BACP current guidelines, we're not here trying to deliver you a training, and we are very aware that that is the position for people in usual circumstances, but these are not usual circumstances. We're not trying to provide a sort of a training or a facility that means you can then call yourself an online therapist, but BACP recognise that in these circumstances there are a certain small number of things that you can take on board and practice safely and ethically with your existing clients. So, the two things are very different, but we do have BACP support in this for anyone who's worried about, whether or not they're following guidelines.
Yeah, sure. And not just the BACP. There is we have other sort of professional organisations to put out advice, and some of that is including a bit of advice, but about the how, and some, the BPS, which I'm about to, are sort of steering us towards the HCPC. Sorry for using sort of acronyms, but there are links to these, which is sort of saying these. It's really acknowledging that these are very different and difficult times, and that we will all do our best, and that there has to be flexibility in order for us to meet the need, and we will have a readjustment period, really, for that. This feels like what we're in, like a very sort of quick readjustment, and then we'll settle down and know where we are, and we'll be somewhere else.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what we want to catch about the context, isn't it? Like, we're in a situation where all counselling provision, it looks like all counselling provision is going to be interrupted or impacted in some way, and how we how can we take care of the clients who are in some kind of process with us? I wanted to catch one of the questions that we've had is around minimum competencies, and I think we're already starting to say about some of those things that we might not know we don't know is about our environment and the client's environment. I think one of the important things to also be knowing in terms of what's different if we have a client on the telephone or in a video session is around the disinhibition effect. And that's something in the training we'd be thinking a lot about, isn't it? And I wonder whether you might both say something about that, and like the difference that you notice when you're working face to face and online. Could that be okay? And Carole, could you start this time, or would that be all right? Yes.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the online disinhibition effect. And actually, whilst I'm thinking about it, I don't know, we could probably get a link to John Suler's sort of written some stuff that might be interesting, and it's easy to read and accessible about the online disinhibition effect. And mostly it refers to, well, you know, in part when you're working online, you might be, or it is different, I would say. It's no less or more, but it is different. So there's something about working in all these different contexts that's different. But if you're working without the same social cues that you're used to, it can perhaps create more fantasy. And you know, for us as therapists, we are sort of trying to evaluate as we go along, and so you know, I guess I'm not doing a very good job of explaining that. Kate might do better.
Well, I think one of the things that we notice with disinhibition is something to do with speed of disclosure and content of disclosure online. And it's a phenomenon that has been very well researched and looked into. And it's a fact that people tend to tell you more and more quickly what's in their mind when they're online. There is something perhaps they're not being inhibited by the presence of the other person in the room. So it's something to look out for. You may suddenly find that this client you know really well is describing things much more quickly, is telling you things they've never told you before. And that's something to be really to look out for, because it can be a very facilitating thing. When I first worked online, one of the things I noticed and was most surprised by was the speed with which sessions moved along. And that was great. And the way in which people were prepared to jump in, to dive in, they really wanted to dive in. It's also something, though, that can create anxiety. It can leave people after a session thinking, what on earth have I just poured out? So it really requires very careful handling. And there's something around beginning and endings of sessions where I think we can really help with this. We can alert the clients ourselves to the fact, if we notice it happening, we might actually stop them for a moment and say, oh, you know, I notice there's a difference that's happening here from when we're in a room together. Have you noticed? We can take 5 minutes at the end to say, you've really told me a lot today. You know, this has felt like an incredibly full and fast moving session. Shall we take a few moments just to ensure that before we end, you know, you're feeling in an okay place? When we open our counselling room door to people, when we open our front door or we go to the waiting room, we have those little bits of conversation, nice day today, and, you know, as we walk along and as we sit down and as we maybe see someone hang up a coat. When we go in online, sometimes bang, we're there. So it's really important, especially around this disinhibiting impact, to be alert to that, maybe to make that extra special effort to start, contain and end well. Another factor in there as well, I think, with the dynamic online is, particularly if you're quite a silent therapist. There probably aren't many silent therapists these days. It's something that's written about historically. But if your usual process is to be very quiet, something can happen online where that's quite disturbing, you know, for the person on the other end. They don't have that felt sense of you in the same way. They may need you to be quite active in a way that perhaps is more active than you usually are. They want to know you're there. And there's something that gets communicated almost unconsciously when we're in a room with someone, that, you know, they want to know that you've not disappeared on them.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, you know, I think the disappearing, that part of the fantasy, I guess I was sort of referring to, but not quite as eloquently. But and could I sort of also add to that, to sort of encourage us to talk a bit about the context as well. You know, there's a sort of propensity, especially if we're a bit anxious and when we're first doing this, to feel like we have to ignore the context of the computer that we're working through, or the environment we're in, or the fact that we're on a telephone, or there might be noises, because all of that will be part of the therapy. Everything that you bring into your room, I guess we consider part of the therapy. So this can be useful and used in therapy as well. So maybe be watchful for that, I'd say. And that's what I would encourage you to do.
You're sort of pointing something out, Carole, as well, about spelling it out, and maybe supplementing some of the things that are said with an email or a document, around arrangements. Because again, especially if it's unfamiliar to you to be looking at someone on a screen, or unfamiliar to them, or both of you, then it may be a little bit hard to kind of hold on to things. So the practical information, maybe it's better to put the practical information into a shared document. I think that's another important point that we often make as well, is that it's really doubly important to, in your own mind, know where is your therapeutic space, and where do you have your confidential therapeutic communication, and where is your practical sort of contracting, appointment making space. Because we're used to using email, we're used to making phone calls, but we need to keep those spaces separate. Our clients need to know where is it appropriate to spill, and where is it contained. Containment's something we're all very familiar with, but it can get a bit blurred if we go online. And if we start to have everything happening through our computer, we may suddenly find unencrypted emails arriving with very confidential and kind of sensitive information. And again, going back to your contracting, keep your setting up information separate from your therapeutic information, and ensure your client understands why. They will really appreciate that. They're going to be frightened about doing this and being not in that safe room with you. The more you keep a safe space for the counselling and a separate space for the business, the more it will replicate what they're familiar with.
Yeah,
that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, and that makes so much sense. And I think having that general capacity just to slow ourselves down, and the client too, because this is the thing. When a client starts to do a lot, and a lot more than we expected that they would do, maybe even more than they've ever done in the room, that can be intoxicating and just really exciting. And so remembering that we might just need to slow everything down and just hold that with some caution, I guess, is really, really important, because we don't want the clients to have their first experience with us with technology and be so overwhelmed that they can't come back, because so much has happened in that hour. So great. I think they're really, really helpful. I notice we've got quite a lot going on around ethics. And it feels important to say that we're all working from the same ethics that we are when we're working face to face. So whatever organization that we're working with or that we're part of in terms of professional association, we want to hold on to those ethics and work to those standards as well. Whether that's BACP or one of the other counselling or psychological associations, the association in the particular country that we're working with. So
it's an interesting fact that happened to me, John, when I first worked online. I think in some ways, I'm ashamed to say this, but in my face-to-face work, I used to see the ethical code as this thing that, tome full of clauses that I didn't necessarily really kind of study. Because I worked online in the very early days of online work, I realised that it's an immensely valuable kind of support guide, because when I was doing something online and I felt I wasn't quite sure whether it was okay or not, I could always find something in the general ethical code that guided me as to whether I was acting in the client's best interests, whether I was preserving the kind of roles that I should be preserving, and the the safety of the client, whether I was putting the client first, all of the things that we are familiar with in our face-to-face work. So it's a really good go-to place is to go back to the general ethical code and say, what am I doing that's making me uncomfortable here, and where does it fit with this? Or what am I doing that feels okay with this? On top of that, on the BACP website, there are additional ethical and working practice guidelines there, and again they'll be in our guide, our resource guide from tonight, and they've been highlighted in the emergency pages on the BACP website. But there are some very good documents, both about the competencies that we need when we're working online and also additional ethical information. You may be familiar with the good practice additional guidelines that are there on the website.
And I sort of feel like I want to say that, you know, we already have these as part of our sort of professional selves. So, you know, maybe in you sort of having to think or very suddenly about doing something new, there's no need to throw any of those out. We're just sort of changing the context. And I've sort of seen some people talking about dilemmas that make complete sense but are a bit sort of where we already have thought through the fact that you can only provide perhaps support by telephone. It isn't you know what it was, and so people worrying about that, of course, because things have changed, but all of what I saw was somebody had thought ethically through what they could comfortably manage and provide, and yeah, so you know, we have it there, and there's some guidance and support. It is changing, but as a community, I see a lot of support for each other out there, and in trying to find a way forward, and you know, stick with our ethics. And
I love the fact you've introduced the word support there, Carole, because it has reminded me of something we've been talking about as we've been preparing for tonight, because you may not be able to continue with exactly the same therapeutic process that you are partway through with your client because of all the issues that arise from these changes, but you may be able to continue to offer them ongoing support. And that's great, and that's good enough. You know, let's all remember our good enough and discuss that with your client. Even if it's not possible to continue in the way that you were working and on the kind of trajectory that you were working, you may still have something really valuable to offer by being present on that contracted regular space with your client. Describe what you're doing as support. If that's what it is, it's fine. Own it. Call it that.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to catch that too, isn't it? Like, maybe what we might choose to be doing is some holding over the next few weeks, and we can be really explicit with that about ourselves, be okay with doing that, and the client too. You can probably see my eyes all over the place. We've had over 229 questions in the Q&A box. I'm just trying to flick through and get a feel for that and what's happening in the chat room and on Facebook.
John, is it worth just mentioning that we are planning to do some more of these at this point? Because people may be panicking and thinking, well, they're not going to get anywhere near what I want to know.
No, absolutely. So it is our plan to be back online this time next week. Same Wednesday at the exact same time. So even if it's just a place where we can all kind of touch base and say hello and dig into some more questions. We've also got some more resources that we'll have in the resource guide. We've had quite a lot of questions around working with children and young people, and we are putting an event on Friday morning. If you're in Northern Europe, it'll be Friday morning time. That link will also be in the resource guide, and it'll be on the online events site. So if you're working with children and young people, we don't have time to get into that in this event, but we will come back to that. I want to go straight into supervision. Can we say something before I stop? Yes.
John, do you want me to speak?
Yeah.
Because we've also talked a lot about supervision, and for people working online, it's always been, and you know, we've had high standards, I think, quite rightfully so. And we've always recommended that if you're working online, it's important to have a supervision online from someone familiar with the online environment. And we we wouldn't say throw that out the window, but we do recognise how utterly essential your existing supervisory relationship is. It's not a time to suddenly say, I need a whole new supervisor. And you may find your supervisor is as anxious and unfamiliar with the setting of moving to distance-based counselling as you are. But please turn first and foremost to the supervisor who knows you, who knows your clients, because of course they will be the best person to help you with this. But our role for ourselves, I think those of us who have done training, and I know there are a lot of us out there, and there are a lot of trained online supervisors, is perhaps to be able to offer ourselves as a resource to the existing supervisors. So, you know, I don't know quite how this is going to work, but I wonder if we can somehow create a space where online supervisors make themselves available for support to existing face-to-face supervisors who are equally feeling thrown by being dropped into a new environment. So, you know, John and Carole and I will continue to kind of work out a way of facilitating this. Supervision is critical, but it isn't the time to say, you know, my supervision isn't right, and to start trying to create a new supervisory relationship.
Yes, yeah. So that's like, I think this is a time where we all need to lean on our supervisors, and our supervisors need to lean on their supervisors. And like, we often think about how circular that process is.
Yeah. Well, it's that mirror in a mirror thing, I always think. Absolutely. You know, that we're all sort of supported by that. But yeah, you know, it would be great if, you know, at this sort of time, sharing experiences and expertise and supporting people in places they didn't expect to find themselves. You know, we are really keen for that.
It's a wonderful role for those who have done the training. You know, we're having to do what we can. We're doing our best. We're doing good enough. But there are great people out there. There have been some wonderful training programs. They still exist. And I know some organisations are rapidly pulling together some much briefer training programs, and that's fantastic. And we'll hope to be able to kind of lead into those as time goes by. We want to be very careful tonight not to start pointing people in particular directions, but to take what's available. But those who have trained and those who have been doing this for some time, you've all got the most phenomenal resources to help everybody at the moment. I do hope you'll join us in trying to be the supporters of this strange new situation.
Well, absolutely. And so in the resource guide that will go out after this hour, we're going to link to training organisations who are offering some of these resources. We're going to be back next week for another hour, the three of us. So watch out for that emerging onto the Online Events website, so we can be more discussion like this. Maybe even just the space to kind of breathe together. Yes. And we're also going to put at Online Events some more resources for everyone to come together over the next few weeks. Kate and Carole, you're offering some of your time for that, other colleagues that we work with and their specific specialisms. So watch out for that in the resource guide and on the Online Events website.
I guess what we're thinking is, if this is sort of helpful, that it's so fast moving that, you know, by next week, we might be in a different, so we want to be current and sort of with you in the present of what is happening, and if some changes have happened that are significant, then hopefully we can go through those together and try and support you.
And I think it's really important to note that it's like, certainly the BACP, which is the professional association that we're part of, and there are so many different associations for so many different colleagues here. But we're not seeing that training is a requirement to be online, but that it's very, very helpful. And in all the events that we've done, we have recommended that we all engage in some kind of training. And of course, in extraordinary circumstances, we want to be using our supervision, the colleagues that have some expertise, and getting ourselves some training. And finding ways not to just draw up our client base. Like, we're working with vulnerable people and thinking about how to keep that support going.
Can I give a little metaphor, John, which I
Yes,
think we
please.
talked about earlier in the medical profession? Because in hospitals now, medical specialists in other specialisms are suddenly having to do very brief, very rapid training in respiratory care. And they never dreamt they would be in that position. And this training is nothing like the training they would have got under normal circumstances. It's good enough, and it's going to enable them to help people to get through this thing. This is the equivalent. We would never have imagined we'd be in this situation, but we are going to be doing that little bit of respiratory care training in helping you to be good enough if you're working in a different way from the way that you're familiar with.
Yeah. I think that's the extraordinary circumstances that we're in, isn't it? And when we were talking earlier, there was something really important about, and these are clients that we already know. Like that's the circumstance that most of us are in right now, and thinking about how can we provide either ongoing therapeutic support or just a holding support over the next few weeks until we see what's going to happen. And a big part of that is us not panicking. I mean, that's the real thing. And kind of being in our community together to kind of help each other when we do panic, because I think we're all panicking at different moments, to help each other return to that grounded and more calm state for each other and our clients.
And the more we work together, the more available we'll be if we fall ill. And we may, hopefully only have to take a short break, but it's likely, which is such a strange situation. But if we've got a colleague or set of colleagues, we can turn to, well, what a fantastic resource that will be for all of us and for all of our clients.
And I heard something the other day I read, I'm sorry I can't remember where it was from, but I thought it was really, really interesting and sort of relevant to tonight as well, in that it was sort of saying, I know we're having social distancing is being talked about, and this person was saying, well, what we're doing is physical distancing because we need to do that, but what we need is social togetherness at this time to keep us together. And that feels like that fits quite well what we're trying to do at a time when physical distancing can sort of is talked about in that way and has a sort of lone type of feeling to it. So social togetherness, that's I like it.
Well, and I'm just noticing a comment in the chat room, and I'm normally we take much more from the chat room, but there's been just so much there with a colleague saying that they did work with a client online today and they were the ones that were nervous. So maybe that's also something to think about. Like many of the people that we're working with we all live in a digital world now, and many people are communicating using these kind of methods that we're thinking and talking about. And also maybe our client is much more used to that than we might think, and so
much more used to it than we are as well, John. They actually, in terms of their technological expertise, may be much better than we are. They may teach us things.
And I really think that good enough, understanding, we are really all in the same boat and we're trying to do, the right thing as such. So I think there will probably be an understanding out there that, we're trying to provide something that, and we've all stepped slightly outside of our comfort zones for it, and that will settle down.
Yeah. Absolutely. I notice we haven't responded to, and there's been more discussion about this in the chat room and the questions about placements and what's going on with students. And I feel like that's something that we need more time with. And I'm hoping that that's something that we can come back to.
John, could I just point out that something has gone on the BACP website today on that very subject? So if you go to their pages about coronavirus, there's a particular section on coronavirus and training, guidance and resources for courses, placement providers and students. So, it's there from BACP. They're working so hard to get this information out there. So use it, do use it.
And, and also I want to say that I've been in contact with some colleges and training providers, and conversations are being had about this, as we speak, as regards these types of things. So I'm sure there'll be more advice, and as soon as they can, we'll be informed about what that means, and whether there'll be flexibility or a change in something because of what's happened.
And equally, they also produce some guidelines about your business, you know, and what, you know, this small business kind of crisis, and how the government, all that the government's putting in place might refer to you and your counselling practice. So again, go to that one. It's another set of helpful pages on the BACP website today.
And ever evolving.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what we're really appreciating about how the BACP are managing this is that they're all publicly facing. So colleagues from all different professional associations can jump on that page, pick up some guidelines, and of course use the guidelines from your own professional association too. But I think that's what I'm also really appreciating. There's a lot of sharing going on here. I mean, it's great that we can all be here tonight as like a really large group. I think we've had just over 1,700 colleagues with us this evening. It's incredible that we can kind of come together and be together in this environment, and the more resources that we can share, the better. Once we're going to be really cautious to finish on time, because we want to be careful with everybody's energy and our energy too. We will finish at past, and then we're going to stay online to make sure that everybody can get the link to join the mailing list to get the resource guide. So it's really worth doing that. A lot of the links that we've been talking about are in there, the link to the BACP page, training organisations, the resources that we're putting on at online events. So please hang around as we do that. But we're going to kind of play ourselves out with another breathing exercise. Yeah. So that also feels important, because I can feel myself kind of speedy through the hour at times. So,
and we also hope this models something around how you might structure your sessions as well. You know, it feels so important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, John, would you like me to take this?
Play us out.
Yeah.
Please. Okay. And then we'll come to please. Yes.
So let's again, maybe just close our eyes, put our feet on the floor, feel the ground beneath our feet. Feel the air around us, touch on our skin, the sense of the community that we've just been a part of, sharing and surrounding us and holding hands together. And just being in touch with how our body feels now. Perhaps it's feeling the heart's maybe beating in a different pace. Perhaps we're feeling something in our shoulders, our neck, our mouth, our back. Just going to our breath again. Maybe in our head, just thinking, may I be healthy? May I be happy? May I have peace of mind? May you be healthy and strong. May you be happy. May you have peace of mind. May we all be healthy. May we be happy. May we all have peace of mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah. And thank you, Kate and Carole, for all the work that you've put in to be here tonight and kind of being ready to respond to the questions and to bring a real groundedness. Sandra and I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for the sharing, and thank you to everyone who's been with us for this hour, whether you're here live with us or you're catching this up in the replay. Yeah, we're really thinking about you and your families and your clients in such extraordinary times.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll say goodbye for now. We're going to close the recording, and then we'll have the link for the email. If you're watching the recording, just jump on the online events site and give us a shout. We'll get that resource guide for you. But till the next time we can be together, we'll say goodbye for now.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Remember, you're good enough.
Yeah.